Hey everyone, so normally I would save something like this for Friday on Let's Talk PlayStation. However, it's very early in the week. We're going to have plenty of news stories this coming Friday anyway, and this is just too big to ignore, which is that Microsoft at one point or another really considered bringing the Master Chief Collection to PlayStation 4. Now, just for a quick origin story on this rumor and why it's so credible, this is coming from the Sacred Symbols podcast, which is Colin Moriarty's podcast. Now, if you don't know real quick, Colin Moriarty used to work at IGN a number of years, and he did Kind of Funny. Now he's moved on to his own Patreon account, where he just does a bunch of podcasts and things like that. But Colin's been in the industry for a very long time. He has many industry contacts, so it's just one of those scenarios where he wouldn't necessarily say something without having, at one point or another, having a credible source that would lead him to believe that this was true. He's actually quoted as saying, "I have it on good authority that the Master Chief Collection was being talked about on PS4 years ago. Like, I have that on great authority." Now, that's one thing, but the other thing is that the Halo franchise director, Frank O'Connor, actually followed up with this on Twitter, and he was quoted as saying, "I'm not aware of the details of conversations between the platforms at a corporate level, but the distance between plans and some what-if, for instance, conversations is a meaningful gulf. We've had plenty of those over the years, but not one line of code was ever even glanced at." Now, the thing about that is that he's more or less implying we didn't actually start any of this whatsoever. No pre-production or anything like that was ever started. You would also assume that this was never considered being contracted out to another developer or anything like that. If any of that even transpired a little bit, something as substantial as Master Chief on PlayStation, we would have had rumors, heavy leaks, things like that years ago when this conversation apparently took place. And that's what Frank's getting at, is that it's very important to understand the distinction between plans and just meaningful discussion. And the meaningful discussion is that at some point or another, this was certainly considered in a roundtable discussion between who knows how many people, but certainly a high-ranking number of people at Microsoft, for example, because this would be their call. Master Chief, the Halo collection, Halo in general, that's their IP. And so something as massive as bringing Master Chief over to PlayStation is not a decision to be taken lightly. But I'm more surprised that the conversation actually did take place. And it's worth noting that with multi-billion-dollar corporations, certainly very outlandish things are considered a number of times. I mean, something, for example, like patents, research and development. Companies like Sony, Microsoft, Apple, Google, they all hold thousands of patents, but really only 2-3% of those ever actually get a consumer release as an actual product. And so that really tells you that certainly companies explore a lot of options, a lot of avenues, and they discuss a lot of crazy things. And that's why we always get these patents on Let's Talk PlayStation with Sony, for example, where they test out all these weird VR kits and motion controllers and weird handhelds that never actually come out, but it's just a commonplace for many big tech companies to explore these things and to understand the tech, and at some point they may want to use this and utilize it later. So something like Master Chief coming to PlayStation is a bit out there, but yeah, at some point or another it really took place. Now let's really dissect this. How important is this for Microsoft? Now, I want to go on record to say that the past year and a half, 2 years, maybe even 3 years, I've been saying on this channel for a while now that I feel as though Microsoft cares less and less about selling consoles because they know they're just not going to catch Sony's numbers. And this is really at the height of where PlayStation 4 was doing so well. And, Microsoft was doing fine with Xbox One, but they just weren't going to sell nearly as many Xbox Ones moving forward. They just weren't going to catch Sony's numbers. And so I've been saying for a while, even on the advent of digital and streaming, Microsoft probably just doesn't care to sell that many consoles. And this was even more solidified this past week when Xbox head Phil Spencer was doing some interviews during E3, and he had mentioned that the business isn't about how many consoles you sell. And a lot of gamers and a lot of Xbox diehards really took that the wrong way, which I can certainly see, although I'm not faulting Phil for that. To be honest, I think it's more of damage control and how he was saying that. It's more of a two-faceted issue. One thing being that he understands that Microsoft's had kind of an uphill battle selling consoles in the past 5-6 years because of how bad Xbox One initially did in 2013 with a lot of their missteps and whatnot, and so he's really been carrying the torch forward, bettering the brand and doing all these pro-consumer initiatives, and that's great and everything, but he understands that it's been so tough as is, and PS4 so far ahead that he understands that moving forward they're probably not favorite to even sell as many Xboxes as the next PlayStation in the next generation of consoles. So I almost feel like that's where he's coming from there, but also in the sense that, well, what he's saying is that services and digital is a very real thing moving forward. Now, they still feel as though that's more of a short-term thing. I've been saying for a while, I think it's more long-term. So many gamers are still very reluctant to do streaming and fully going digital with their games. I think a lot of gamers are actually doing all digital more so than they are to do something like streaming, because the internet infrastructure is just not there for so many homes. There are still data caps, so it's definitely a big problem for a lot of people. So it's going to be more long-term for sure. And he actually even went on to say that Project Scarlet is not going to be the last console. Now, he didn't say that there's going to be a generation after that. He didn't say it's going to be more in veins of a souped-up, better Project Scarlet, much like Xbox One X is to the standard Xbox One S console, same like PS4, PS4 Pro. And, you know, we also had that story about Sony saying that they're not necessarily sure if there's going to be another PlayStation after the next generation PlayStation, which we're all dubbing PlayStation 5. We're assuming that's what they're going to be calling it. But it seems very obvious that there's still going to be a place for consoles even well after this next generation, which has already been confirmed from both Sony and Microsoft, that at the very minimum, we are getting more machines out of Sony and Microsoft. But what's it going to look like moving forward? I think both of them are in for a rude awakening, and Google Stadia, in terms of how many subscribers they get onto these services, and all these publishers are even exploring their own subscription services as well. I think they're all going to see that the numbers are not going to be very good, and it's going to be longer than they all think, which is why consoles are still going to be quite relevant, I think, for a good portion of time. The thing is, consoles are still probably going to be relevant well beyond after streaming and digital take over in terms of the number one favored way to play games, just in the sense that it can always be an option, and Sony's talked about that a little bit, where it can always be something there for people to buy. And that's what Phil Spencer is also saying this past week, is that it can always be an option for certain consumers. And that's definitely Microsoft's initiative right now, because they're putting their games literally everywhere. And that's what we're talking about with the Master Chief Collection, which is that, and it's funny, they're almost being a little conservative with the IP in the sense that, yeah, they're bringing Halo over to PlayStation, but they're still only doing it in the sense that they're bringing the collection over, and they're not bringing a recent mainline entry into the franchise. And I think that's them discussing the opportunity cost of the franchise, being that how much money could they possibly make introducing the franchise to millions of gamers that may not have been exposed to it before, and that opportunity cost could probably show them the opportunity cost to a mainline entry on PlayStation, and just in general, Microsoft becoming a third-party publisher, just releasing their games pretty much everywhere, but they also happen to have hardware. And that's not really too far-fetched of a future that we could possibly have down the road. There is still situations where you could go out of your way to buy vinyl in 2019, and you're still going to be able to buy vinyl in 2020 and beyond. There's always that market for that. And something like Google Stadia, for example, the way that they've described the service, I mean, they've already confirmed you can actually purchase titles individually. And if you remember, PlayStation Now, when it came out, was not a subscription service. You could rent titles individually. And so I think they're really they're checking out all these different ways of how gamers could possibly buy the content. And of course, they want you to be in a one-price subscription fee. That way, it's the lowest barrier of entry, so that's how they get the most users onto their service, and that's how they get the most subscribers, and that's how they land the most deals, because at the end of the day, you don't need to sell hardware to make a boatload of money. Most of their money is from software sales. Every single publisher, pays a fee to be on that manufacturer's hardware. And so when you take out the hardware and you just say, hey, look, we've got a service that's branded as Xbox, we've got a service branded as PlayStation, and they're still taking that cut, but now you only need, as a consumer, $10 a month to get in. I mean, you're probably going to see way more sales that way than you ever would have selling a $400 or $500 console. That's how they're seeing it right now. That may not be the case with Scarlet or PlayStation 5 moving forward, but they're hoping that's going to be the case 10 years down the line, well beyond Scarlet and PlayStation 5. The difference here is that Microsoft is being much more liberal in their future, whereas Sony is still being pretty standoffish. They're still playing it, they're still treading very lightly. They understand that they have these major IP that people absolutely love, these big story narrative driven games, and they're always super well received, and they get all this attention, and they put all these big marketing dollars into the next big PlayStation IP, whether that's Horizon, Spider-Man, God of War, the next major Naughty Dog game like The Last of Us Part 2, which we're expecting soon, hopefully in early 2020. But whatever Naughty Dog does after that, everybody's going to be super pumped for that. And so PlayStation, at least for them, they understand that they can keep their games exclusive, and they can probably see a major return on that. And they're probably not as concerned with an opportunity cost, especially given that PlayStation is the market leader in terms of hardware. So they don't care about the possible sales on Xbox, because it wouldn't even nearly be worth it, because they've already sold well enough PlayStation 4s. But it's going to be a different conversation when you do have xCloud out there, when you do have Stadia out there, and you have PlayStation Now, which has 700,000 subscribers, not very impressive today, and it may not be very impressive based off of how well Stadia and xCloud does. Now, I'm not saying those two services are going to do very well, because I still think all three of these have an uphill battle, and it's not going to be very easy for any of them because gamers are super reluctant, and for good reason. I'm super reluctant. You guys know I have a shelf of video games, and despite how progressive I sometimes talk about these services, I just understand that's where they're coming from. That's how they see the market going, and I'm just talking more candidly about the topic. But even for me personally, I'm going to have a shelf of games. Now, sorry I'm getting so long-winded in this conversation and I'm getting so off topic, but to go back to the actual original rumor, it's also worth noting that it's a few years old. So he's saying that a few years ago, this conversation took place about bringing Master Chief to PlayStation 4. So this would actually be in terms of a native port, where the game would actually be developed and released as a PlayStation 4 physical game that you'd buy individually. So this isn't necessarily talking about bringing the game to xCloud or making it available streaming-wise. This is actually porting the game natively to PlayStation 4, which really shows they know they're not selling as much hardware, and that's why they're exploring what they could do with all their IP, how they can get their games everywhere, and how they can beat Sony to the jump, how they can beat Google to the jump, and take Xbox as a brand to be available anywhere. And so it's less of a conversation about playing on Xbox Ones or Project Scarlets, and just playing the next major Halo franchise, playing the next entry in Forza Motorsport. And it doesn't matter how you do it, because however you decide to play the game, it's money in Microsoft's pocket. Because Sony in recent years has had all these PlayStation exclusives that entices people to buy into their hardware, they can be a lot more restrictive with it, and they can entice people to stick with PlayStation hardware and PlayStation services. And PlayStation Now is available on PC, but Sony doesn't release their major recent releases on PlayStation Now right away. You can see them dabble a little bit, like letting go of the Quantic Dream games. Those are PlayStation-owned IP. Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, Detroit Become Human. Those are still owned by Sony, but you can see Sony dipping their feet in that water a little bit and saying, hey, well, let's put 3 major PlayStation games on PC, being sold individually. We'll see how that works. You can see everybody experimenting a little bit. And so Sony's doing it as well. They're just being a lot more cautious. And I think that's the best approach for them, because their IP, I think, is more meaningful today. And they do so well with them. And so it really bodes well for Sony that they've built this platform that is so desirable that you have even one of your closest competitors just thinking, you know what, we're going to make tons of money if we could possibly put Master Chief on there. Now, again, it was just a conversation. It never actually ended up happening. I think Microsoft realized that they should probably keep something like Halo just strictly on Xbox platforms. And so this may be something that never comes up again, but boy oh boy, is it crazy to think that at one point this was actually considered. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, by all means, have fun in the comment section below. I'm sure that's going to look really fun. Try to have some good civil conversations down there. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. Despite that we've been talking about Xbox so much, but hey, it's the games industry, it's a new generation. There's a lot of crazy things going on out there, and you guys know we have to talk about it. Other than that, that's pretty much it. I will see you all in my next video, and you take it easy.